Hey everyone, and welcome to the Daily News Roundup for Sunday, March 9th, 2025. We've got a lot to cover today, starting with that really concerning situation in Syria. Looks like things aren't exactly peaceful after the fall of the Assad regime.
Yeah, it really goes to show that getting rid of a dictator doesn't mean peace and stability just magically appear. We're seeing just awful violence breaking out against those Alawite civilians, especially in those areas that used to be Assad's strongholds. It's a messy situation for sure, and there's a lot of deep-seated tension between different religious groups that's adding fuel to the fire.
And to make things even worse, the interim government's having a tough time keeping things under control, especially with reports of foreign fighters, with their own extreme ideas coming in and stirring the pot. Seems like those hopes for a smooth transition to power are fading pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Interim President al-Sharaa, he's got a huge job on his hands right now. I mean, he's promising to hold anyone who's involved in the violence responsible, but the big question is, does he even have what it takes to actually do that? The resources, the authority. I mean, things are feeling really shaky over there.
Okay, well, let's shift gears now and head over to Romania, where the upcoming presidential election is already causing a major stir. So the country's Central Electoral Bureau, they've made a pretty bold move, banning the far-right candidate Galen Georgescu from running in the May rerun.
Yeah, and this ban is raising some serious eyebrows about, how democratic things really are over there and the influence of foreign powers. The whole thing stems from accusations of Russia meddling in the last election where Georgescu actually won the first round. Tensions are running high with clashes erupting between his supporters and the police. It's a bit of a powder keg right now.
Definitely a situation the world's watching closely. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, he's already spoken out against the ban, while Romanian officials, they're pointing fingers at Elon Musk, saying he's meddling through his social media posts backing Georgescu. It's become a real tangled web of accusations and global power plays.
It definitely shows us that elections, even in countries that seem to have their act together, are becoming more and more vulnerable to outside interference, especially with social media playing such a big role these days. It really makes you think about how we can protect those democratic processes in a world where information is being weaponized right in front of us.
All right, well, let's move on to a story that's unfortunately become all too familiar, the ongoing tensions between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So Israel's taken a pretty drastic step, cutting off Gaza's electricity supply in an attempt to pressure Hamas into releasing those Israeli hostages.
This is a really worrying development. Cutting off electricity is going to have some serious humanitarian consequences. I mean, think about it. Hospitals, water treatment plants, all those essential services will be impacted. It's basically punishing everyone, and it's the most vulnerable people in Gaza who are going to suffer the most.
Yeah, Hamas is condemning the move and warning about what might happen to the hostages. And even though there's talk of ceasefire negotiations happening soon, the situation feels incredibly fragile. It's hard to see how things can de-escalate when both sides are resorting to such extreme measures.
This is a really tragic example of how entrenched this conflict has become. Both sides think they're in the right, but all this violence does is create more suffering and make a lasting peace seem even more impossible.
Okay, now let's talk about this very public and pretty heated online debate that's going on between Elon Musk, Marco Rubio, and Poland's foreign minister about Starlink's involvement in Ukraine.
It's a really interesting look into how complicated modern warfare has become, where private companies like SpaceX are having a bigger and bigger impact. Musk saying that Ukraine's front lines depend heavily on Starlink's satellite internet service. But then you have Poland's foreign minister pushing back, saying they might look for other options if SpaceX isn't reliable enough.
And of course, Senator Rubio jumped right in defending Starlink and emphasizing how crucial it's been to Ukraine's defense. It's turned into this kind of battle over who gets the credit and who controls the story.
It also makes you wonder about the long-term consequences of being so reliant on private companies in war zones. Who really has control over these technologies, and who's held accountable if things go wrong? These are questions that are going to become more urgent as technology keeps reshaping how wars are fought.
Let's turn our attention now to Iran, where things with the U.S. are continuing to escalate. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he's lashing out at bullying countries, a pretty clear shot at President Trump's demands for nuclear negotiations.
Yeah, all this back and forth is a worrying sign for sure. Trump sent that letter to Iran warning about possible military action if they don't come to the negotiating table. And that's really stirred things up in Tehran. Khamenei saying the U.S. is just trying to dominate and he's refusing any talks under pressure.
And then you have Iran's upcoming naval drills with Russia and China to factor in as well. It's a pretty clear show of unity among countries that are often at odds with the U.S., and it's definitely sending a message to the world.
It's a dangerous game they're playing. One wrong move or one misinterpretation could easily turn into something much, much worse. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for the region, but for global stability as a whole.
Switching gears back to the U.S., we have a tense situation unfolding right outside the White House. The Secret Service shot a man following what they're calling an armed confrontation.
It really highlights the huge amount of pressure on those security teams who are tasked with protecting high-profile targets. Apparently, the suspect was thought to be potentially suicidal, and thankfully President Trump wasn't there at the time. But it's a stark reminder that threats can come out of nowhere.
It's also raising questions about whether current security measures are enough and how to strike that balance between protecting people and respecting the right to peaceful protest. It's a tricky balance, and one that's constantly being tested in a world where threats are becoming harder and harder to predict.
And it definitely underscores the importance of mental health awareness. The fact that the suspect might have been suicidal points to a bigger problem in our society that we need to do a better job addressing. We have to get better at recognizing and supporting people who are struggling before things turn violent.
All right, well, let's move on to some brighter news coming out of the Vatican. Pope Francis, who's been battling pneumonia and bronchitis, is expressing his thanks to his medical team for taking care of him.
It's a good reminder that even in the middle of all chaos in the world, there are still moments of human connection and compassion that shine through. The Pope's message is all about the importance of empathy and caring, especially for those who are vulnerable and need healing.
The Vatican says he's responding well to treatment, and his condition is slowly improving. It's a welcome piece of good news in a week that's been filled with so much conflict and uncertainty.
It's also a testament to the hard work and dedication of medical professionals everywhere. They're often working tirelessly behind the scenes, and they deserve all the recognition and appreciation we can give them.
All right, let's shift gears again and head down to Argentina, where the city of Bahia Blanca is dealing with some pretty devastating floods. Torrential rainfall, way more than they usually get in a year, has caused widespread destruction.
It's a tragedy that really shows how vulnerable our cities are to these extreme weather events, which are likely made worse by climate change. The damage to infrastructure is extensive, and the impact on people is just awful, with 13 reported deaths and thousands forced to leave their homes.
This is a wake-up call. It's a stark reminder of how powerful nature can be and how urgently we need to invest in climate resilience and being prepared for disasters. We can't afford to ignore these warning signs anymore. The consequences are becoming way too real.
It's a shift we need to make, moving away from just reacting to crises and towards actually planning and preventing them. We have to put money into building resilient infrastructure, developing early warning systems, and adopting sustainable practices. The cost of doing nothing is just too high.
Okay, well, let's turn our attention now to a horrific incident in India that's triggered a lot of anger and demands for justice. An Israeli tourist and an Indian woman were gang raped while they were stargazing near a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
This is such a devastating story and unfortunately reflects a much wider problem of violence against women, particularly in places that rely on tourism. It's a harsh reminder that safety and security should be a top priority and that the authorities need to take real action to protect both locals and visitors.
Yeah, two of the accused have been arrested, but the investigation is still ongoing. This incident has obviously shaken the community and the tourism industry pretty badly.
It's a wake-up call for India to address those underlying societal norms that allow this kind of violence to continue. It's about changing attitudes, challenging those patriarchal structures, and making sure women feel safe and respected in public spaces.
Right, from a crime against individuals to a tragedy that exposes some serious systemic failures. We're going to Uganda now, where a devastating landslide at the Katizi rubbish dump in Kampala has killed 30 people.
This is just heartbreaking on so many levels. It shows the extreme poverty that forces people to scavenge for survival in these incredibly dangerous conditions. And it also highlights how inadequate waste management systems are in many developing countries.
And of course, the blame game has already started with local and national authorities pointing fingers at each other. But the real issue here is the lack of resources and infrastructure to deal with the growing problems of waste in urban areas.
It's a tragic reminder that environmental issues are so often tied to social and economic inequality. Finding sustainable solutions means taking a holistic approach, tackling poverty, improving infrastructure, and promoting responsible waste management practices.
Okay, back in the U.S., The Trump administration's policy of deporting undocumented migrants in chains is continuing to draw criticism both at home and internationally.
Yeah, this practice raises some serious ethical questions about how we're treating vulnerable people. The images of people, including women and children, being shackled and marched onto planes are incredibly disturbing.
Gurpreet Singh, one of the deported Indians, has been sharing his experience, talking about the dehumanizing treatment he endured during the whole deportation process.
His story shows the human cost of these policies, the fear, the uncertainty, and the feeling of betrayal experienced by those who risked everything for a better life in the U.S.
The Trump administration says these measures are necessary to stop illegal immigration, but critics argue they're cruel, unnecessary, and violate basic human rights.
This debate really gets to the core of who we are as a nation. Do we choose compassion and human dignity, or do we resort to punishment that causes suffering and tears families apart?
And speaking of how U.S. actions impact the world, President Trump's policies and rhetoric are having a noticeable impact on Canadian politics, believe it or not.
It's a fascinating example of how interconnected our world really is. Trump's tariffs and his often combative approach towards Canada have actually made the Liberal Party more popular, closing the gap with the Conservatives.
It seems like Canadians are banding together in response to what they see as a threat from their neighbor to the south.
It speaks to a sense of national unity and a rejection of Trump's style of politics. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out in the next Canadian election.
All right, let's move from international politics to the world of fashion, where a particular trend is sparking conversations about modesty, body positivity, and what society expects. We're talking about the Free the Nipple movement.
This trend, with its emphasis on sheer and revealing clothing, is challenging those traditional ideas about what's considered appropriate to wear, especially for women. It's about taking back control of your own body and challenging those double standards that often exist when it comes to female sexuality.
Celebrities and fashion designers are embracing the trend, but public opinion is divided. Some are praising it as empowering, while others are criticizing it as inappropriate or attention-seeking.
But this conversation goes beyond just fashion. It's about challenging those deep-seated societal norms and starting a dialogue about gender equality, body image, and self-expression.
And this trend isn't exactly brand new. It has echoes of similar movements in the past, like the minimalist styles of the 1990s and that resurgence of the Free the Nipple movement in the early 2010s.
It reminds us that fashion often reflects the bigger social and cultural changes happening around us, and that what's seen as taboo or shocking one day might be completely normal the next.
Okay, from the runway to the world stage, we're going to Denmark now, where veterans who fought alongside U.S. troops are expressing feelings of hurt and betrayal over President Trump's interest in buying Greenland, a Danish territory.
This situation really shows the strain that Trump's America First agenda has put on relationships between the U.S. and its allies. His disregard for international norms and his desire to get his hands on Greenland's resources have raised serious doubts about whether he can be trusted as a partner.
These veterans who fought side by side with American soldiers in places like Afghanistan are deeply offended by Trump's actions. They see it as a sign of disrespect and a betrayal of the sacrifices they all made together.
It's a reminder that trust and diplomacy are the foundation of strong international relations. And when those foundations crumble, the consequences can be huge and completely unpredictable.
And while Trump is downplaying his interest in Greenland as a strategic move, a lot of people in Denmark see it as a power grab that disregards their sovereignty and their interests.
It's definitely fueled a sense of unease in Denmark and across Europe about where U.S. foreign policy is headed under Trump.
From a veteran's feeling of betrayal to a story of resilience and recovery. Let's turn to Indian music, where popular rapper Yo-Yo Honey Singh is making a comeback after being away for 7 years.
His return is interesting because he's being very open about his struggles with addiction and mental health. These are topics that are often brushed under the rug, especially in the entertainment industry.
And Singh's honesty has really connected with his fans, who have welcomed him back with open arms. His new music might not be for everyone, but his willingness to be vulnerable and share his story is inspiring.
It's a great example of someone using their platform to break the stigma around mental health issues and encourage others to seek help. It's about breaking down barriers and having open and honest conversations about these challenges, which affect so many people no matter who they are or where they come from.
Okay, finally we have a very concerning development. Over 80 Afghan women who escaped Taliban rule to pursue higher education in Oman are now facing deportation because of U.S. aid cuts.
This is a direct result of the Trump administration's decision to freeze funding for U.S. aid programs. It's left these women who were studying subjects that the Taliban bans for women in an incredibly vulnerable position.
They had to flee their own country to seek out educational opportunities that were denied to them under the Taliban's oppressive regime. Now, with their scholarships gone, they're facing the very real possibility of having to return to Afghanistan, where their safety and their future are uncertain.
It's just heartbreaking, and it shows the human cost of these political decisions. These women were trying to build better lives for themselves, a chance to contribute to their society, and now their dreams could be shattered.
It really highlights the ripple effects of cutting aid, especially for those who are already the most vulnerable. It's a reminder that what we do or don't do has consequences that reach far beyond our own borders.
It raises these big ethical questions about our responsibility to protect people who are fleeing oppression and looking for opportunities to improve their lives. What does it say about us if we turn our backs on those who need our help the most?
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is. It really is.
Well, that's it for our first part of today's Daily News Roundup. We'll be right back after the break to continue our discussion.
It really raises these big...
Yeah, with all the emphasis on sheer and revealing clothing, it's really challenging those traditional ideas about what's considered appropriate attire, especially for women.
Right. It's about women taking back control of their own bodies and challenging those double standards that we see all the time when it comes to female sexuality.
Exactly, and we're seeing celebrities and fashion designers really embrace the trend. But it seems like the public is still pretty divided on the whole thing.
Yeah. Some people see it as really empowering, while others think it's just inappropriate or attention-seeking.
It's definitely a conversation starter, that's for sure.
And it goes way beyond just fashion, you know? It's about challenging those deep-seated societal norms and sparking a dialogue about gender equality, body image, and self-expression. It's about pushing those boundaries and getting people talking.
And, this trend isn't exactly brand new. We've seen similar things in the past, like those minimalist styles back in the 90s. And then, of course, the Free the Nipple movement had a resurgence in the early 2010s.
That's true. It's a good reminder that fashion often reflects those bigger social and cultural shifts that are happening around us. What might be seen as taboo or provocative one day could be completely normal the next.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump back to the world stage now. We're going to Denmark, where some veterans who fought alongside U.S. troops are feeling pretty hurt and betrayed over President Trump's desire to buy Greenland, which is a Danish territory.
This whole situation really highlights the strain that Trump's America First approach has put on relationships between the U.S. and its allies. His disregard for international norms and his focus on securing Greenland's resources have raised some serious concerns about his reliability as a partner.
These veterans who fought side by side with American soldiers in places like Afghanistan are taking this personally. They see it as a sign of disrespect and a betrayal of everything they sacrificed together.
You can understand why they feel that way. It's a reminder that trust and diplomacy are absolutely essential for strong international relations. When those foundations start to crumble, the consequences can be really significant and totally unpredictable.
And while Trump is downplaying his interest in Greenland as a strategic move, many people in Denmark see it as nothing more than a power grab, one that disregards their sovereignty and their interests.
It's definitely fueled a sense of anxiety in Denmark and across Europe about the future of U.S. foreign policy under Trump.
For sure. All right, well, let's move on to something a little more uplifting now. Let's talk about resilience and recovery. In the world of Indian music, the popular rapper Yo-Yo Honey Singh is making a comeback after a 7-year break.
Oh, that's right. I remember him. His return is really interesting because he's being very open about his struggles with addiction and mental health. Those are topics that people often avoid talking about, especially in the entertainment industry.
Exactly. And his honesty has really resonated with his fans. They've welcomed him back with open arms. Now, his new music might not be everyone's cup of tea, but his willingness to be so vulnerable and share his story is pretty inspiring.
It is. It's a great example of someone using their platform to break the stigma around mental health issues and encourage others to get help. It's about having those open and honest conversations about the challenges that affect so many people, no matter who they are or where they come from.
Couldn't agree more.
Huh.
Okay, well, before we wrap things up, we need to talk about one last story. It's a very concerning development about over 80 Afghan women who fled Taliban rule to pursue higher education in Oman. They're now facing deportation because of those U.S. aid cuts we talked about earlier.
This is a direct result of the Trump administration's decision to freeze funding for USAI programs. And it's left these women in a really tough spot, especially since they were studying things that the Taliban forbids women from learning.
They had to leave their home country just to get the educational opportunities that were denied to them by the Taliban's oppressive regime. Now they're facing the possibility of having to return to Afghanistan, where their safety and future are completely uncertain. It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. This situation highlights the ripple effects of these aid cuts, particularly for those who are already the most vulnerable.
It's a reminder that our actions or inactions have consequences that go way beyond our own borders.
Absolutely. And it raises those big ethical questions about our obligation to protect people who are fleeing oppression and searching for opportunities to improve their lives. What kind of message does it send if we abandon those who need our support the most?
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
Well, it's been a pretty heavy day in the news. Lots of stories about conflict, tragedy, and injustice. But even amidst all the darkness, there have been those glimmers of hope, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. You know what's really stayed with me today?
What's that?
The courage of those Afghan women. To flee their homes, to pursue their education, despite all the obstacles in their way, it's incredibly inspiring.
Their determination is inspiring. It shows how powerful education can be. You know, even when things are tough, the pursuit of knowledge can give people hope and be a real force for positive change.
I agree. What about you? What stuck with you from today's news?
Well, you know, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, and I think what really stood out for me is this theme of unintended consequences. Whether it's the violence in Syria, the impact of U.S. policies on Canada, or what's happening with those Afghan women, it's a reminder that our actions can have far-reaching effects that we don't always see coming.
That's a really good point. It's a call for all of us to be more aware, to really try to understand how connected everything is in the world, and to recognize that even small decisions can have a huge and lasting impact.
Yeah, and maybe it's also a call for more empathy. You know, a reminder to think about the human cost of our choices and to try to find solutions that put compassion and dignity and the well-being of everyone first.
That's a great way to put it. Well, that wraps up today's Daily News Roundup. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and analysis from around the globe. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.